What's up, everybody? We're back at it with our final regular season pregame talks. Been a long season. Glad to have you all with us, and glad for those of you that have joined us along the way, and especially those that have participated in the discussion. Um, right off the rip, big thing to talk about. We made it. Playoffs are next week. We're gonna have a good amount of content coming up for that. All in all, it's really been a good season so far, and I think us as fans really should be thankful. Spring football has been something that's came and went, came and went, came and went, and yet it seems to be really doing well for the time being, at least. And that's where I think there is hope, especially going into next year, the year after that, and hopefully, well into the future. And ultimately, it's been a testament to the fans. This was something for them as well as the players. Don't get me wrong, but ultimately, the fans are really who made this, possible. I would say. So without all of you, all of us, ultimately, there is no spring football. But as it stands right now, I think there's a lot to be proud of the UFL this year. I think we've made a lot of progress. Um, but to get kind of into what we have this week, first off, some of our team's journey are going to end this week, unfortunately, and only 4 of our 8 are going to continue on to the playoffs. But ultimately, the league's been pretty well balanced. If you look at the entire season, I would say, there's been some times uh, where it's not been the case, but then others, we've seen some benefits. Like some teams have really increased their play. Like the Kings started out terrible and now they're competing for the last playoff spot. So not bad for them. And ultimately, I think there is a lot for us to be excited about. But to kind of do our little news wrap up, to see what we've got going on across the week, or I guess across the headlines for the league coming into week 10. First off, is we do have an idea that we'll be starting to move toward ownership groups for the specific teams. This really coming out of the UFL expansion and the Echo Investments Group, going to have some share. Unclear whether it be specifically in the team or whether it'll be in the league, but to the point where they control the team, it's unsure. We're unclear exactly what's going to happen on that front. However, we do have some things to look at, which will be where are we going to, is it going to be an expansion focused fundraising push, or is it going to be a really localized push where we've got these teams already, St. Louis, for instance? Why don't we just find an investor there? And that could be something we look at and are seeing in the future, but odds are is where that investment will probably set the pace for expansion moving forward. There's plenty of money out there to be invested in a team. And I wonder exactly how bad the cost is, truly. Then when we look at our next, I suppose, positive mark on the league, especially as we head towards the end of this 2026 season, is they already are looking ahead to 2027. So we do have some summer showcases that are going to be kicking off, so that'll be really good for. Now that's a good sign for us because we know that the league's kind of looking ahead to next year. But also it's great for the players. Maybe we'll get some new good names. As you see here, Chandler Rogers, starting quarterback for the Louisville Kings. Are you kidding me? Right out of the showcases. So you never know what level of talent you're going to get, and ultimately could change the name of the game for a franchise for even more than that. So ultimately, the showcases are some of my favorite parts of the UFL because it does give, hey, anybody got a chance. Show up to the showcase, you might get in. And honestly, there's a lot of good talent that comes out of the showcases. Some people are just looking for a shot. But then the next biggest news of the week, I suppose, is really this. So there's a scheduling conflict, of course, with the Orlando Storm really coming into the number 1 spot of the league. They should be hosting a home playoff game. But ultimately, there are scheduling conflicts because we do play in the soccer stadiums. So not going to be able to be held at the Storm's home field. So they'll actually be playing at Historic Crew Stadium, which is the Aviators field. So for the fans that may be in the Midwest, it could be beneficial, especially when you look at our teams that we have left. The Kings, so if the Kings get in, they might end up playing there, but more than likely it'll be DC. So what we've got is a situation where attendance could be light, possibly, but we'll have to see exactly how things shake out for that. But really, kind of a shock, especially for those fans in Orlando, because if they want to watch their team and support their team, they're going to have to travel all the way to Columbus, which, let's just say, a little bit of a far trip if you're in Florida. And the real question is it just a scheduling conflict, or is this a sign of the things to come? They want to move these playoff games to be all neutral site, which, if that's the case, I think you could expect a shakeup coming into the playoff every single year, because teams are not going to enjoy that. Especially the stadiums, they're going to want that extra money. But looking at our United Bowl, of course, that's the next big news across the league. We know when that's going to be, June 13th. That'll be in DC. We'll see if DC gets there. Really great opportunity for the franchise to play in a hosted championship game in the United Bowl at their home field. Unsure if that'll happen. We'll have to see. But we also do know who the halftime show will be. So 50 Cent is confirmed to be the halftime performance. So those that do attend really should be a really good time for all the fans there. 50 puts on a good show, so everybody should enjoy it. And if nothing else, it'll be a great game of football as well. But when we look back to Week 9, we did see some interesting shakeups across the league. So first and foremost, DC really has been on and the last 4 weeks for them is a gauntlet, and it's been tough. It's been very, very tough for them, and having to play the Storm, which is arguably the number one team in the league, which may be different had Tamu not got injured, but regardless, playing the number one team in the league last 2 weeks back to back, tough. So unfortunate loss for them, and I'd say the most disappointing factor of it is that they clinched their playoff spot not because of what they did, but because of what Birmingham did by losing. So not something you really want to take pride in, but, something that you could, I would say, I'm not going to say that the story's written on the defenders, because I think they do have a chance, but ultimately, been a tough showing out of them recently. But then you look at the Stallions, and that's really where it gets to the Aviators. Kind of shocking. So that was really what I wasn't surprised, or I guess I was surprised by, because a lot of people thought that the Aviators might not make it. But then when we look at our next game, the Renegades versus the Kings, really the Renegades, it's just, what are we doing here? That's the only question you can ask, because you start out the season, you get 3 wins, and then you lost 6 games straight. That doesn't look good. Doesn't look good on the league either. Doesn't look good on the team, especially for the fans. There are people that are spending their time coming to these games, and unfortunately, the Renegades have really had a tough season, let's say. But then the Gamblers versus the Battlehawks, I was expecting there to be more shocks in this game than there were. There was not, which is all right. But I do think that there's hope for the players on the Gamblers. I could see them making a return to the league, whether it be next year or to some other form of football. But ultimately, the Gamblers, it's just like if the season was 3 weeks longer, they could make a strong push. But so far, it's been really, really a tough showing. And ultimately, what I worry about is the coaches. Because all the coaches were new, so how many coaches are going to return? But if we look into what we've got for kind of the box score and everything, we'll get into each of these games a little bit more in more detail. But all in all, we had some shockers last week. Aviators taking a win. That was pretty much the main shock, I'd say. The rest of them, we kind of had a good feeling were going to happen. Gamblers got to win the week before, which, don't get me wrong, was a surprise. But ultimately, not the biggest shock that they didn't, recreate that that victory this week or this last week. So if we look into our Friday night football game, and ultimately, yeah, I feel bad for the defenders. You know, first your quarterback goes down, and then you got to play the number one team, and you're playing in their stadium. And don't get me wrong, one touchdown could have changed this game. So it was a lot closer than it may have seemed. And then when you look at like how the game really shook out, it was really a lot closer than you'd think. So Sanders is playing quarterback for the defenders, who would have been like kind of the third string quarterback for the defenders going into the season. 160, 0 TDs, 0 interceptions, which isn't bad. You know, not terrible performance out of the quarterback. Plummer, though, 276, 3 TDs, really, really making a case to be number one in the league. And you look at our time of possession here, you're sitting at 31 to 28. So DC really had the ball. They got more yards. They had more plays. They just weren't as effective. And ultimately, it did kind of come down to that passing attack. You know, maybe the scheme wasn't there. Maybe they were trying to protect the quarterback. I don't know what it was, but that's really where the difference arose. But when you look at rushing yards, you know, if DC can keep that rushing game going and they can squeeze a TD here and there, ultimately they'll be able to really dominate in the playoffs, especially against some of these teams. Like, it's all about balance, and that's where, like, DC got, you know, they can get yards. You know, their story isn't over yet. But then when you look at our rushing, you know, Sanders did a lot of rushing, which you don't want to see your quarterback doing. But ultimately, you know, especially when you go into the playoffs, you got to do anything to win. Corbin with 52 yards, not bad. You know, he's kind of that number one running back, but you know, you want to see a stronger performance, especially into the playoffs. But then Jackson with 64, you want to see these numbers inverted. You want to see 75 out of Jackson, maybe even more. Valladay with only 17, that was a little bit of a shock. But all three of these running backs right here, Smith, Jackson, Valladay, really all could put up 60 themselves. So if they're going to win in the playoffs, that's exactly what they need to do. And if and this is a big if they do get to host a playoff game, or the championship, the United Bowl, it's really going to come down to the running backs. Jackson's going to have to put up 80. Valladay's going to have to put up 2 TDs, if not more, and then maybe 50 yards. And then Smith's going to have to come in and clean up for at least 20 or 30. But, you know, it really is going to come down to who they play. And we don't know who that's going to be depending on who gets into the playoffs. But more than likely, they're either playing the Storms or the Battlehawks. And I'd say against both those teams, they got a good shot. You know, against the Storm, this is the thing. They play the Storm again this week. So, you know, you play them again in the playoffs, you'll have 2 weeks to learn their scheme. So it's really then down to the coaching. Can you adjust and beat them? But we'll see what happens. Then when it comes down to receiving, Rowland really, really doing well. Badger, really their main 2 receivers have been performing. They'll keep performing. But if you can shut down one of these wide receivers in the playoffs, this game's a lot different. So it really might come down to some playoff or some defensive performances, especially in these final weeks. But as it stands right now, one of the most prolific passing attacks is on the Orlando Storm. Looking at DC, you had Kuti with 45 yards, Powell with 40. This is another thing with the new quarterback stepping in, got to redevelop all these relationships with the receivers, and that takes time. So I wouldn't be surprised if their passing game is a little sluggish, especially moving in, you know, throughout the rest of the season. Then you got Butler with 11 tackles, pretty good performance there. Smith with 8, kind of our leading performers, and then Conley, Gary on here, 6 tackles, pretty impressive. We want to see more sacks out of this defense, especially if they want, like, if the defense can end a drive or two, and the running backs can score a few TDs, you know, DC can win games. But as it stands right now, that's not been the case for them lately, and that's all right. You know, they've faced adversity this season. Losing your starting quarterback alone is, you know, an excuse to not make the playoffs, and they've still made it. And don't get me wrong, they did kind of perform well enough in the beginning to, you know, stack the deck for themselves. But ultimately, you know, if they can go back and they can get a win against Orlando, you know, maybe they do all right. But it's more than likely that they end up playing Orlando again in the playoffs, which, if you think about fan bases, we're talking Florida and Washington, D.C. having to travel to Columbus. So unlikely that you see the biggest performance or show out of fans there, but there is hope that there could be some good things coming for it, and that's where if you are a DC fan, don't get me wrong, it sucks. Your quarterback's out, you have lost a few games, but by no means are you out of this race for the United Bowl. By all metrics, you are still in this. It's all about offensive scheme at this point, defensive scheme, and who's going to win that game. Because the talent of the team of the DC Defenders is, I would say, higher than most other teams. Maybe matched by the Storm, but for the most part, they are arguably the best roster, the best team, the best constructed team. And so far, they showed it this season, and I get it. You lose your quarterback; it's a stumble in the road. It's a little bit of a pitfall, but ultimately, there is some hope there for the team. And I think if you're a fan, it's not time to check out. I would say not yet, at least. So we'll see how this week goes for them. But ultimately, I do think there's hope there. But then when you get to the Stallions and the Aviators, this is where the Stallions really controlled their destiny, and I appreciate the Aviators stepping in to play spoiler. But as a Stallions supporter, you should be concerned with the performance. The Aviators have been sloppy, don't get me wrong. They got maybe some better quarterback play last week, but still, a lot of questions for that team. So when we look into kind of how the team or the game really shook out, ultimately it came down to Columbus kind of dominating this game. Like the score was a lot closer, and I think that's one check in the favor of the Stallions is that if they're able to put up points effectively, maybe they are able to really go in and steal some games. But as it stood in this last performance, it was just total domination by the Aviators. And the score was close. So, there's potential for the Stallions to win this, but the Aviators look like a completely different team. Arguably, had they been able to perform as they did, they've had moments this season. They've had a few moments where they've looked like the best team in the league, but the rest of the season they've just been shite. So, kind of tough for them. But when we look at kind of what it came down to, pass yards were better. Morton, I don't want to say he's better than McClendon, but ultimately seemed a little more competent with the scheme that the Stallions were throwing at him. But it came down to the rushing attack. That was really what changed the game. Is that when you're able to get your running backs in there getting yards for you, it really changes the entire dynamic. Morton, though, throwing for 3 tuds, 1 interception. The 1 interception is not great, but DTR, 1 tud, 2 interceptions. You brought DTR to kind of eliminate those. Didn't exactly happen, unfortunately. But if DTR can clean those up, there is a good chance that, they can clinch themselves a spot in the playoffs. Some things will have to happen for them, but it's possible. But then when you look at the rushing attack, Morton for 96 yards. So this game really came down to the quarterback play. And I'm not going to say that's how it should always be, but that wins you games. And it won them this game. And it may win them their next game. But you take out Morton's rushing, you basically have a pitiful rushing attack. 39, 29, what are we doing here? Tawx could do better. But if you look at DTR, who is the lowest rusher on the Stallions, he's almost as high as our third highest rusher, even second. So you got to see more yardage when it comes to the rushing attack. But then when it comes to the passing game, and this is where there was some good relationships developing with McClendon, but under Morton, Chisholm's really kind of stepped into that number 1 role with Lovett. But Gunnar Oaks, Winston Jr., Martin, White, all of these players could make a difference in a playoff or in this last week 10 game. But then when you look at the Stallions, if they can punch their ticket, you look at their receiving core, Ross, Mickens, Davis Price, Davis, Deion Kane, Mickens, it's going to be they're dangerous. They're super, super dangerous. But it's just like they've just been so inconsistent. And it comes down to the offensive line. You know, the quarterback's getting killed out there. Then you look at defense. Tizzino really always going to be leading the defense for the Stallions. 11 tackles. Pretty good performance. One tackle for loss. You'd like to see a few more there. But then Whitehead Jr., pretty good. 10 tackles. Not great. Tony Fields, though, really kind of been leading the team, or more leading the defense with 10 tackles. Again, not bad. One sack, which really can make a difference, especially. And Stallions' weakness really comes down to their offensive line. And as long as their offensive line is weak, they're going to struggle. And I wouldn't be surprised if that keeps them out of the playoffs, to be completely honest with you. I don't want to say that. I don't hope that happens to them, but how that offensive line's been performing, they're vulnerable. They're absolutely vulnerable. If you can get in there, get a few sacks, you know, you're going to change their entire game plan for a quarter, if not the entire half, and maybe even the entire game. But then our third game of the week, which was the Kings versus the Renegades. And I think most people thought this was the Renegades' best chance to sneak a win. And the Kings, well, they had different ideas. It was the last home game for them, so I'm not surprised they showed out. But when it comes to the Renegades, you know, good team, or they were a good team, but I think there's going to be a lot of questions, you know, moving forward. What do you do with the franchise? What do you do with the coach? What do you do with the quarterback? Because the collapse we've seen, you know, it doesn't look good for the league. And it being the first game on Sunday, that's really going to be, that's your main window. And not exactly, not great. And I will say the worst, the bad beat for this week, worse would have been Dallas plus 1.5. Because they really, like, look at this line. They thought it was going to be very close, and it was not nearly as close as they thought. Came down to the Kings' domination. Almost had it for the ball for 10 more minutes. We're talking nearly a quarter, basically, that the Kings had the ball more than them. So 470 yards, absolute domination when you come to yardage. Plays, almost 20 more plays than them. Yards per play. So when you have more plays and you have a higher yards per play, you're really, really, let's just say, taking control of the league. Then when you get down to the yardage, you get pass yards in there. That's where I think Rodgers has really distinguished himself. They moved Bean out, but Rodgers has really been kind of a stabilizing force for the team. Turnovers, you get one turnover for each, you know, pretty balanced, kind of expected in the UFL that each team is going to have a turnover, at least one. Looking at our passing game, they did put in Lennon. Unsure if Lennon is going to start to see more of a role, maybe just some packages or more packages, but ultimately I think the Renegades are going to be doing all they can to not finish the season on a 7-game losing streak. So don't be surprised if you see a little mix-up. But Reed, you know, was one of the strongest quarterbacks in the league. It really has hurt his case, I would say, you know, throughout the season. I don't know if that's coaching has hurt him or what. But Rodgers comes out of the showcases, leads now the Kings, may even lead them to the playoffs. So, you know, DC has clinched, but DC has the exact same record as the Kings. So don't be surprised if the Kings, you know, make a good showing, you know, these last few weeks. Then when we look at rushing, Merriweather was kind of their number one rushing a running back. Lingard's kind of stepped in. It's really been kind of a revolving door when it comes to that backfield. But Wheeler and Robinson really, really been doing good for the Kings. Rodgers able to step in there, get a few yards when he needs it. But Robinson and Wheeler, if they keep this performance up, expect them to go to the playoffs. I would not be surprised. And let's just say, a few teams lose out this season, or this last week. Let's say the Storm lose, maybe the Battlehawks lose. Kings might even get themselves hosting a playoff game. Possibly. Just possibly, though. But looking at our passing attack, Black has really kind of stepped in to be that number one receiver with Rodgers. They developed that relationship. Winstead, though, and Lucky have been doing all right. Wheeler, of course, get out of the backfield, gets a few catches. But then when it goes to the Renegades, Vaughn's was that number one receiver, and his presence has really been muted. One reception out of most of these receivers, it's almost like the Renegades don't know what they're doing. They started out as one of the most competent looking offenses, and they've had almost the worst performing team, the entire time. And that is where I think like you really, really should be concerned if you're the Renegades fan base, if you're the coach, if you're the ownership, you got to be concerned because this team looked great. And they arguably had the worst performance this season out of all of them. And the Gamblers and the Aviators, let's just say, have not done that well. But whatever. So then when defense, though, I do think the Kings need to strengthen their defense in some form or fashion, or maybe just get more performance. And then the Renegades, their defense it struggles. It really struggles. So I think there's a lot. There's some good talent on the Renegades, but as it stands right now, you need a roster rebuild or something because this team did not work this season. And then our final game of the season, kind of our Sunday seconds, was that Gamblers versus the Battlehawks. And ultimately, a lot of people were optimistic, because the Gamblers were going on a bit of a run there. And they did win last week, so a lot of people thought, or 2 weeks ago, a lot of people thought maybe they had a chance to make a late push to the playoffs potentially. Most people didn't think it would happen, and it honestly did not. So, good performance, though, out of the Gamblers these last few weeks. But I do think, like, there's a lot of questions, just like, coaching has seemed very competent. I will give them that. Very competent coaching. But it's just like the quarterback, and I get it, across the league, you're playing with some pretty poor quarterback talent. You find, some hidden gems here and there. Most of the starting quarterbacks have got some decent talent, but when your starting quarterback goes down and then your backup gets injured, then you're just in a revolving door quarterback. And that's really been the name of the season for the Gamblers. Looking at this game, though, it came down to time of possession. Total yards, 342. Pretty good performance out of the Battlehawks, and I think this is really a result of Perez becoming more familiar with that offense, developing those relationships with the receivers, but also being able to take off some pressure from the rushing game because you're able to really throw the ball consistently. When it comes to the Gamblers, 288 yards. Pretty good performance out of them this season. Not great scoring, but did kind of win the yards per play battle. For our pass yards, 231 of the Battlehawks, really a result of Perez, but then 146 for the Gamblers is not a terrible performance either, especially what they've given us this season. Then when it comes to rushing yards, 142 out of the Gamblers, 111 out of the Battlehawks. Not great for the Gamblers, of course, especially, you lose the game, you do good with your rushing attack, but overall, you need more if you're going to kind of compete in this league. Turnover-wise, 2 each. At least that was equal for them. But all in all, you don't want to see so many turnovers. So, where I think the game really was decided, though, came down to the passing attack. Just because you got more competent and consistent quarterback play out of Perez than you do Deckers. And also, let's just say Deckers is worried. And you got Plumlee in there, really played kind of almost more of the game because Deckers been going in and out because of he's injured. And Plumlee, not terrible, did throw an interception, but, maybe a future player in the league. But so far, it really still does need some development. But Perez, 239, 1 tud, 1 interception. So still cleaning some things up, of course. But then when you look at their rushing attack, this is where I think they have the most to be proud of. 55 yards out of Howard. He really is the number one back across the league, or at least in the top 2. But then Perez for 18 yards. Oh my gosh. 6 attempts, so you don't want to see him out there rushing so much, but at least he's able to get a few yards when he needs to. Then you look at the Gamblers. Really been a revolving door for the rushing attack, but Yarns for 98, that's a good performance, and I think that's something you can be proud of. Plumlee, that's going to be kind of his main attack, is that dual threat. But the story of the Gamblers comes down to their passing attack. Moreno, Cropper, really, really good talent, may make a chance to get himself to the league potentially. And then John Trey, 18, not great. Yarns, the running back, 22. So they need some work there. But then when you look at the Battlehawks, who is this relationship developing with? Well, McBride seems to be pretty consistently getting some targets. Butler, 4 for 60. Generally, that can be a lot higher. But as that relationship develops with Butler, this team becomes much more prolific. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic about if you're the Battlehawks, because with Perez, it's been kind of an onboarding process, and you're going in the playoffs. You got one more week at least, maybe two, and each week the offense has gotten better. So I am optimistic for the Battlehawks. But then when we look around to our stat leaders through week 9, Plummer really making his case for that MVP season, especially with Tamu being out. Really not too much competition, but almost at 2,000 yards, going to cross that going through week 10. Reed, though, still has had a good performance. The team has just really not done well with him. So I think, there's some optimism there, because if you look at Reed, 18 passing touchdowns, they have a prolific passing attack, but it's just the team has not been able to capitalize at all. Plummer, 15 passing touchdowns. Expect that number to climb, and I do think that strengthens his case for the MVP. He's leading in yards, second place for TUDs. Prolific team, prolific offense, and I would not be surprised. And then we look at our other leaders here. Frost is benched. Rogers might make a little case to move up this list, but by and large, our top 2 spots are not going to move to or have too much changeover. Rushing yards, Jarviana, as I said, kind of leading the league at this point. Dion could make a run this last week to overtake him, or Corbin. So, we got some closeness there. Yarns, 345, so done pretty well these last 2 weeks for the Gamblers. Not too high of a record, I'd suppose. 430 is what we're leading with. Rushing touchdowns is going to be Jackson, going to continue leading probably throughout the season and maybe even through the playoffs, depending on how they go. But Wheeler, done all right. Did get that 4-tud game, has got his 5th. But if you look, we still got a 4-way tie with 4 tuds. So as these tuds climb this week, if any of these 5 players get a tud, Dion might have some competition, but I expect Dion might get one more this season. Then receiving yards, no surprises here. Hakeem Butler leading the way. Mickens, depending on how DTR performs, might make a case to overtake him. Badger as well. But as it stands right now, I expect Hakeem to really kind of lead the league with receiving this year, and might even be first team with that. Receptions, Rowland, really good performance. Not as many yards, but ultimately the safety blanket for Mr. Plummer. So receiving touchdowns, Vaughn's really has been doing well, but that, these 6 touchdowns were mostly formed through the first 3 weeks. But then across the league, not too much to be proud of here. But then when we get to tackles, this is where I think there is one of the more interesting races going on between Crowder, Tizzino, and Fields. And I think if we look ahead, defensive player of the year may come down to who has the most tackles. So through this last week, depending on how this performance goes, don't be surprised if we see a little bit of movement in that leaderboard and ultimately the decision on player of the year when we come to defense. Because don't get me wrong, the linebackers have been very, very important this season. Especially with how the running attack's been. They've been shutting down a lot of the drives. As you look at the motion coming in here, right there, that's how you disrupt a play. That's how you mess up a drive. That's how you change the nature of a game. Then looking at our players of the week, our offensive player of the week, and I think one of the most outstanding performances this season when it comes to our offensive players was Jalen Morton. 430, 213 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 13 rushes, 96 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown. Really good performance. And I think, if nothing else, there's a good future ahead for this player. Ultimately, McClendon, I think, has talent. And you ship off McClendon to one of these places where maybe there's not consistent or good quarterback play, he can still perform and he can still compete. But if the Aviators can keep Morton around, maybe there's a future for him with the team. But overall, I think if you're the Aviators going into Week 10, you're feeling good about what your quarterback can do. Then when we look at our defensive player of the week, that is Darian Butler. And ultimately, really, really good performance. 11 total tackles, 7 solo, 2 tackles for a loss. Impressive showing. The defense has been the difference maker throughout the entire season. And ultimately, I think if you can pull one of these players of the week and maybe pull them up to the league, maybe they're a rotating piece for you. Maybe they contribute. Maybe they're the difference in your season. I think a player like Butler might be able to do that. But ultimately, that stat sheet does speak for itself. 11 tackles, 7 solo. Impressive work. Really impressive work. But the most dominant, and I mean dominant, across all categories, player of the week this season has been Tanner Braun. Louisville Kings kicker really has, I would say, kept them in a lot of games, been the difference maker, and I'd say has one of the better shots to get pulled up to the league. Went 3 for 3 on field goals, 2 for 2 on extra points, a 54-yard long. He has gotten a 4-point field goal. So if the Kings can punch their ticket to the playoffs, Tanner might go on and really change the nature of some games and contribute to them going deep, making a run. So really one of the better performances this season, and ultimately I think one of the favorites to maybe make a step in their professional football career. But our next step, of course, looking at our viewership, really an impressive performance for Week 9, and honestly one of the greatest weeks for the league so far. So had the most watched game since 2024, which was really impressive, especially on Fox, which has been one of our more struggling networks at times. Not so much in the weekend windows, but 1.59 million for that Renegades versus Kings matchup, and that really is impressive. That's way above what a lot of other sports are getting. And as that viewership continues to climb, expect advertisers, expect the media, expect them to notice, because these, a million viewers each game is impressive. Pulling that many eyeballs is really a big win for the league. Then we look at that second most watched game for us would have been that 1 million viewers for the Stallions and Aviators. And we look at both these games, we got the Stallions and the Kings, who, don't get me wrong, are on a little bit of a playoff push against the Aviators and the Renegades. And both of them, those teams, kind of some of our worst teams across the league. But ultimately, really, really good performance, and I think a strong sign. Maybe it was a result of the weekend. Everybody's hanging out, ain't got much to do. But as it stands right now, I do think where viewership is going, it is trending upward to the right, which is what you want. And I think if you're a repoll, you got to be proud because, so far the league is working. There's eyeballs on it. People are enjoying it. And I think there's a lot to really look ahead to. Then when we look at this, that peak on that ABC game was 1.6 million, but pretty much one flat. Second most watched game this season. Really, really good performance out of ABC. That's been kind of one of the better, I would say, broadcast partners so far this season, and really done well when it comes to viewership. And you're on every single TV in America, so you'd hope that viewership would be high. Then when we turn to attendance, and I think there were some good signs coming out of Week 9, and I think this may be a little bit of a result of people trying to get in, see their game before the season ends. That way, you get a lot of people that are like, oh, I want to go see a game. They never get around to doing it, but then it comes down to the last home game of the season, and then you got to go see it because it's your last chance. And I think we did have some of that at play in Week 9. So when you look at the Aviators, we do got one more home game coming up this week in Week 10, but 9,000. So we are kind of going up from that baseline and that 8,000. But then when you look at the Gamblers, 6,000. So a little bit better for them. Not quite their peak of that 7,000, but definitely better. For the Kings, you're going to see that 10,000. So I think you're probably seeing pretty close to 10, maybe 8,000 season ticket holders, and then 2,000 others just joining in. For the Storm, things are looking good. 10,000 was the final home game of the season, so it's a pretty good performance there. We'll see what happens in Week 10 and kind of how that performance shakes out. Battlehawks may be in for quite a good ride. We still don't exactly have the schedule for the semifinal games, but I do think there's a lot to be optimistic about, and attendance is at least stabilized. And stabilizing is better than dropping. So I do think that is something the league can be proud of. And then we look at our power rankings across the league. Not a lot of surprises here. I'd say the biggest shock is going to be the Kings in that 3 spot. And let's say the Kings get a win, St. Louis takes a loss, Orlando takes a bad loss. I wouldn't be surprised if the Kings climb these rankings even further. Then you got the Defenders sitting in the 4 spot. They've been clinging to the top 4, and I get it, they're in the playoffs now, but there's a lot of questions there about their power, especially for the remainder of the season. Then the Stallions sitting in that 5 spot, probably justified there. I think you could make a case to switch them with the Defenders. But then we got the Aviators, Renegades, and then the Gamblers. And I think I would probably have the Gamblers a little bit higher based on their defeat of the Battlehawks. But the Renegades, I understand they've got the talent, but man, have they struggled. Looking at RJ's power rankings, pretty much the same for us. Slightly different when it comes to the Louisville placement, which I can understand why RJ's got DC so high. The running back, the rushing attack is prolific. They are an effective team. They still can put up yards. They still can put up points. But Louisville's really, really looked good. Houston sitting in the 6, probably where I'd have them. Columbus in the 7. Maybe after last week's performance, you could bump them up a little bit. But I do think Dallas in that 8 spot is probably the most justifiable placement on this entire list. And of course, Orlando in the 1 spot. But I do think there's a lot of agreement between the official list and RJ's. I think, that big change is going to be that Louisville spot and then Houston. Houston should probably be a little bit lower, but ultimately Dallas being in the final spot is, I think, the most justifiable. Then our final look at our ESPN power rankings, compliments to our boy Matt Willis throughout the season, been able to give these, put these out to us. So we've got the Storm in that number 1 spot, pretty consistent across all the leagues or all the lists. Then we've got the Battlehawks in the 2 spot. That's pretty consistent in what we've seen across the league as well, or across the list. Then we got the 3 spot, the Kings, which is what we had in the official rankings, which is probably the most justifiable placement for them. They have looked good, especially, all phases of the ball. Offense, defense, special teams. They are looking good. So I do think there's a lot to look forward to. Rodgers has done well for them. Then our 4 spot, the Defenders, same as the official list. I'm not sure that I agree with the 4 placement here. I get it, they're in the playoffs, but, not great for them. Aviators in the 5 spot. Now, this is a shock, and I get it. They whooped the Stallions. So they probably should be above the Stallions, but as it stands right now, Stallions got a shot to make it in, but they've really, really struggled to be consistent. But wow. That's probably the shock of this list right here is the Aviators in the 5 spot. That's pretty high to have them. I get it. They had a good week. And maybe that's just a sign of the Morton ran offense. But then the Renegades above the Gamblers, I can't get behind. I get it. You got competent quarterback on the Renegades. But even if you have a good quarterback, the whole team just stinks. So what good does it do you? Probably, I would think, should have the Gamblers there. Then we've got another grueling truth power rankings from James Ernst. As you guys know, pressure creates truth. So looking at that ranking, 1 and 2 spot, pretty much the same. Having the Defenders in the 3 spot, I can't justify that. Having the Kings in the 4 spot, I think, is fair. Stallions in the 5. I don't know how you move the Aviators down a spot after they beat the Stallions. And then the Renegades moving up a spot after they lose. I don't know if I justify that either. I do think, there's a case to be made for some of these placements. The Aviators in the 6th spot is justifiable. I don't know how I feel about some of these placements. But ultimately, the road to the United Bowl does run through week 10. So I like the top 4. The bottom 4, I think there's a lot of flexibility here anyway. So I can see why the placement was what it was. But looking into kind of how we've had the league, or how the league went ranked across the season, every 2 weeks. So most recently we had week 8. Didn't have a team reigning supreme. Storm may be making a case to move up to that position. But as it stands right now, we've got some teams that are down bad, some teams that could be better, some teams that are balling. But when we look at the week ahead, we've got our Friday night football game. But before we get into that, I did want to kind of go into some concerns I had and look back more at week 9. So starting off just with DC, they clinched the playoffs, but, who is going to lead that offense? And I understand they've got some competent backup play, but as it stands right now, the team has seemed rudderless. And the running backs have been able to keep them afloat, but I do think there's some questions there. Looking at the running backs, they've been pitiful. And at this point, I think you start to ask the question, does the team return to the league next year? Not what you want to hear, but, bad turnout for fans, bad performance of the team, decent viewership, don't get me wrong. But, you do have a lot of questions there. I hope they are able to return, but right now I think it's been a bad showing out of that team. Then when you look at the Aviators, you did get some good performance out of Morton, but I do think there is some questions there. Is that going to return? Is that going to be consistent? Can the team build off that? And ultimately, if the quarterback's running the ball the whole time, quarterback gets injured, what happens then? You're going to start to see that offense become neutered again. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but I'd say that's my main concern for them. I think the Aviators are here to stay in the league. And I do think there's a good future ahead. I think there might be some coaching changes ahead for the Aviators, and I think they need to have some, but we'll see what happens this offseason. Then for the Gamblers, it's been a consistency problem the whole season. It's all because the quarterback consistently gets injured every single week, so they're kind of in a bad way. And I do think there is some questions about their return to the league next year. They've had bad attendance, bad performance now 3 years in a row out of Houston. So I wonder, at what point does it become too much? And I know you don't want to lose football, but maybe, football is saturated in Texas, so maybe it's a time to look elsewhere. But then our next team, the Stallions. I think the big concern for me with the Stallions at this point is DTR. And I get it. That offensive line is contributing. He's getting pressured. He's getting sacked. He's getting hits. But ultimately, if the quarterback play cannot be good and consistent, like if you can't throw for over 150 yards, don't be surprised if, you don't go to the playoffs. not to say that they're not, but the quarterback play has got to be much better than it has been. And I think that's been a problem for the Stallions all season long. Then looking at the Kings, I think they've done well. I will say, part of my concern is their offense, specifically their rushing attack, just because it's been so inconsistent, especially when it comes to, finishing drives. But I do think, they're really looking good. That team is firing on all cylinders right now, and I think if you're a Louisville fan, things might be going well for you. Then we got the Battlehawks. Their offense has been getting better with Perez kind of becoming more familiar, and that issue may be resolved. But as it stands right now, I think that's been a liability for them. And if they want to go deep in the playoffs, they're going to need to have much more production than what they've had. Don't get me wrong, you can get yards all day, but if you can't score points, you're going to have a struggle. Then for the Storm, as we talked about earlier, my big concern for them is they lose their home playoff game. So kind of sucks for them. But I think they'll be all right. They've done well on the road. They've done well at home. I trust in Coach Beck. Hopefully he doesn't have a first-round exit like he normally does. But ultimately, I think the Storm, there's a lot to look ahead to. Then to turn just to some overreactions we have off the last week. First up, Aviators fans packing the playoff game in which their team will not be represented. I'm not going to lie, I think that is not an overreaction. I think they very well may do that. It seems like Ohio is a great state for football, and it seems like the fan base is hungry. So don't be surprised if you see some Aviator fans there this upcoming Saturday or next Saturday. Then our next overreaction is the Stallions stumble and don't make it to the playoffs. Is this an overreaction? I would say no. McCarron, it's his first year coaching. He's learning the league. He's learning professional football. But coaching, I won't say the issue's been coaching. There's a talent issue on this team as well. So I'm not going to say that's an overreaction. Then our next one, Louisville stalls and doesn't get into the playoffs and clinch. I think this is an overreaction. I think Louisville probably out of all the teams outside of the Storm is probably the best team going into Week 10 just based on performance. So I would be amazed if Louisville really stalls out and doesn't make it deep this year. Then we got DC running the table through the playoffs. Now, this one I'm not going to say it is an overreaction, but I'm not also going to say it's not an overreaction. There's a strong chance that DC just goes up, puts up 300 yards rushing each week, and then wins every single week. That could happen. That very well could happen. But at the same time, they could also go out there, put up 100 yards, 20 rushing, and then lose in the first week. So I'm not going to say it's an overreaction. I'm also not going to say it is. We'll circle back on this one after Week 10. Then our final overreaction is that only one quarterback is going to the league. Part of me thinks that's an overreaction, just the fact that we've had some inconsistent quarterback play. But I do think there's a good case for at least one maybe getting pulled up. I don't know which one it is, but I think Jack Plummer probably, especially if he secures that MVP spot, don't be surprised if he gets a call to training camp. Especially with how the NFL's been looking. Jets could use him. Arizona could use him. There's a lot of teams that could use a competent backup, and if nothing else, a potential starter. So Plummer may be our one ticket. So I'm going to say this is not an overreaction. Probably one does go. Then our final look back at the week is first looking at what our headline was for this week. Or coming out of Week 9 would have been no team clinching, and that did in fact happen. The Battlehawks did get their win, so they did clinch. So that was unfortunately not a headline. Then the Aviators sputtering out. They did not sputter out. They ramped up and did very well. And then looking at the best week in sports, they had the best week in sports. They may have found their quarterback of the future and more, and then all in all played spoiler to the Stallions, who really did have the worst week in sports. They controlled their destiny and they lost. So now they're going to be in for a much tougher path to clinch their playoff spot and may not even make it. But looking ahead now at our week ahead, we've got our Friday Night Football matchup, which will be the Renegades visiting the Battlehawks. So going into the playoff standings, it's quite possible that the Battlehawks lose and maybe the Kings host a playoff game. And with the Renegades on a 6-game losing streak, don't be surprised if they are doing every single thing they can to win. So if there is going to be a surprise this week, I think it comes out of our Friday Night Football game with the Battlehawks. But ultimately, Perez has been getting better each week, so don't be surprised if he really leads the show going into tonight. Then for our Saturday showdown, we'll have the Gamblers visiting the Stallions. And I think, because if the Stallions lose, they're pretty much out. They're done. But if the Stallions win and some other things happen for them, they may get a chance in the playoffs, but I don't know that they'll go that deep. Then for our Sunday starter, we'll have a little bit of a rematch from last week, the Defenders taking on the Storm. Don't be surprised if it goes the same way, but ultimately, depending on how this game goes, I think gives us a good show or a preview of how the playoffs might go as well. Then our Sunday seconds and our game of the week, we've got the Kings visiting the Aviators. And off of the performance of the Aviators last week and how the Kings have been playing and the fact they need to get into the playoffs and a win to do it, there's a lot riding on this game because I think the Aviators would like nothing better than to kill the Kings' playoff dreams. But ultimately, the future of the Kings' playoff hopes we'll have an idea of on Saturday because we'll know whether the Stallions won or not. Because if the Stallions win, there's a lot riding on this final game of the season. Ultimately, I do think for Columbus, one thing you can be proud of is you do get to host the final game of the season and call out some players. I think just to look ahead on that, I think this performance is really going to come down to this week and kind of moving forward. First off with DC, Jackson. he's going to have to get 70 yards or more every single week moving forward if they want to have a chance to compete going into the playoffs. Then for the Stallions, DTR's got to perform. He's got to do better than he has, and if he doesn't, don't expect them to make it to the playoffs. Then for Louisville, they need to get the running back up and running. Winstead's done well. He scored some tuds for him, so maybe that's who does it, but they got to get some more consistent yardage out of their running attack. And looking ahead, week 10, really, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. We got some good times, 12 o'clock kickoff, and then we've got a 6 p.m. kickoff, which I do think is a little late, so don't be surprised if that 12 p.m. kickoff gets moved to maybe a 3, just because I know that ABC loves those viewers. And if it makes more sense to go concurrent, they might do that because that did work out for them last week. But then ESPN2 will get a game this week, and Fox, is always going to have their Friday night football game, which has through this season and last been the most premier product for spring football. So don't be surprised if that makes a return for next season. And in this Friday night football game, I think the main storyline heading in, Perez is going to have a chance to take on the Renegades, and ultimately maybe get some revenge for shipping them out of town, because they chose Reed, and maybe they chose wrong. So don't be surprised if there is some emotions going into this game, and I'm sure they'll be bringing up in the broadcast as well. So other than that, we do have some other storylines to watch, and ultimately it's going to come down to kind of the Louisville and Stallions games. So looking at this Friday night football, it will come down to Reed's performance and Perez's performance. This game is going to completely ride on the the quarterbacks. The running backs may have an impact, but generally it's going to be the quarterbacks first and foremost. And the thing is, Renegades have lost. They've lost and lost and lost and lost and lost and lost. So don't be surprised if they come in here trying to get a win as hard as they can. Then when you get to the Battlehawks, that Perez-Butler relationship is developing, so don't be surprised if you see some good yardage coming out of that. Then looking at our Saturday showdown, we got the Gamblers at the Stallions. Big thing here, I would say, that you want to look out for is how is the quarterback play or the offense going to be out of the Stallions? Because as it stands right now, the Stallions have really struggled to be consistent. And the thing is, the Gamblers, they've got a decent defense and offense. So they could win this game, and if they get a win, Stallions are out. And hopefully that doesn't happen for the sake of the Stallions fans and the sake that they've been in the playoffs every single year in the UFL, and this would be their first year out of it. But as it stands right now, I think there are a lot of alarm bells, or there should be some alarm bells ringing down in Alabama. And then when you look at some of our key players, Moreno Cropper, really, I would say one of the better receivers across the league. Just hasn't had the best quarterback throwing to him. But if Moreno Cropper puts up a good performance this week, don't be surprised if he gets some calls going into the playoffs. Then looking at the Gamblers, other than Cropper, we'll see who's playing quarterback. More than likely, it's going to be Plumlee, but Deckers could come out for a few final passes. But for Birmingham, it's all going to come down to DTR. He is going to be the key player in this game. Depending on his performance, is going to be how the game goes. Then looking at the Storm and defenders, big thing here, it's going to be Plummer, of course, on his MVP performance, but the bigger questions, and I suppose the bigger pressure is going to be riding on Spencer Sanders. You're stepping in for Tamu. How the team's future rides on you. Their playoff hopes. You got the chance to host and have home field at the United Bowl, but what's going to happen for that? And then looking at the Storm, Plummer really been doing well. Roland probably will do well as well. Just don't be surprised if this game ends up going much larger for much more points than the last one did. Then our final game of the week, Kings at Aviators. I think there's going to be some big fireworks with this game. Rogers and Morton, two guys that are trying to put on a performance for themselves, and this could be their last chance to play football. So I expect them to really put in some work this week, and don't be surprised if they're moving the ball really, really well. Morton, though, I think I'm excited to see what Morton does. 213 passing, 2 tuds, and then 97 yards on the ground. I'm excited. This could be a really huge week for them moving forward. And then looking at our DraftKings preview, got the Renegades at the Battlehawks. Battlehawks given 3.5. Check out our best bet. That's going to be taking the Battlehawks at 3.5. There's a chance this game is closer than 3.5. There is a chance, but I'd say you're probably close or probably safe taking the best bet there. Gamblers at Stallions. Stallions given 3. Let's see what the best bet is. Wow, it's Stallions at 3. I'm actually probably going to take the opposite in the Gamblers +3. I feel like it could be a much closer game, just based on and all these players on the Gamblers. Like I said, this might be their last chance to play football, so don't be surprised if the Gamblers come in here and play spoiler. Then looking at the Storm, at the Defenders getting 1.5. I think that's actually a pretty fair line. And man, there has been a lot of movement on the favorites to win the championship because DC was the favorite for a while. Now we're seeing equal odds between the Storm and Battlehawks, so they're not giving much chance to either team in the 3 or 4 spot. So we'll see what happens with that. But ultimately, Plummer and Rollin really have developed a really good relationship. And taking the Storm at 1.5, I think that's a small enough line. It's justifiable. Then Kings at the Aviators. Aviators getting 2.5. Now that's a close line. This is going to be an interesting game. So if either the Gamblers or the Storm wins their matchups, the Kings are in the playoffs automatically. So before this game kicks off, they'll know what's going on. But if the Stallions and Defenders win, the Kings have to go on the road to get a win to secure that playoff spot. So depending on how the week shakes out, we'll see exactly what happens throughout this process. Because ultimately, there could be a chance where the Kings already are in the playoffs and they sit some of their starters. But there's also the chance they got to fight for their chance to get in the playoffs. But don't get me wrong, I really do think that the Aviators are going to be trying as hard as they can. But the point spread, it could be a very close game. So this best bet down here with the money line, probably smart. Probably very, very smart. But regardless, there's a lot riding on this week, and it really all comes down to the playoffs. We've got 1 spot remaining, 2 teams really competing. So who is going to be the clinching this week? So we look going into last week, into week 9, we only had 1 team clinch, but then with the Battlehawks getting their win, they clinch, and then with the Stallions losing, DC clinch. So we got 3 teams in, 2 teams still in the hunt, basically. Gamblers are eliminated. Aviators are eliminated, but they won last week. They did what they did what they needed to do. But really, it's going to come down to the Stallions and the Kings. And ultimately, when we look at how this all worked out, it came down to Birmingham losing. Because their chance, they could have clinched last week, but they did not because they lost. But with them losing, DC gets in, and then Battlehawks got in. So now we've only got 1 spot left. So compliments to Fox. Take a look at week 10 here. Compliments of the UFL, of course. We've got Louisville. If they win, they're in. But Birmingham, if they win and DC gets a win and Louisville loses, then Birmingham gets in. So I will say, Louisville controls their destiny. Birmingham does not, and that's a result of them losing last week. So don't be surprised if there is some shakeups coming on that front. And then we look back at kind of what we had for some predictions. We had the Defenders, Storm, and Battlehawks. Defenders got in because they won so much in the early season. Storm got in because they've been dominant. Battlehawks got in because they've done well this season. And then the Renegades, let's just say that spot was up for grabs for a while. But which team is going to clinch? Is it going to come down to the Kings, or is it going to come down to the Stallions? So we've got a very, very much a little bit of a derby on who's going to get that spot, because we got the Storm, DC, and the Battlehawks all in. We don't know who is going to host that second playoff game, so we'll see how things shake out, because I would not be surprised, because if the Battlehawks lose, I think they might give the game to Louisville, the home game. Very possibly if the Battlehawks lose. So if they lose tonight, don't be surprised if they're not hosting a game next week. But more than likely, they'll host a game next week. Then we return and look at our MVP power rankings, and we're still pretty sure that, or just based on how things have been going, More than likely, Plummer's going to get this. So don't be surprised if he does get the award and maybe a call up to the next level. But then looking at some of our other teams, Reed, Peta, been doing good, might make a case for some other awards, but probably not the MVP. And then looking at our money lines based on who they think is going to win. So for tonight, we got Battlehawks are expected to win. Tomorrow, Saturday, we got the Stallions. Then for Sunday, we got the Storm. And then our final game of the season, the Kings. Overall, probably like I like the Battlehawks, don't get me wrong. I like the Battlehawks quite a bit. But I think the Renegades are hungry. They don't want to go on a 7-game losing streak to finish the season. Then for the Stallions, probably likely, but don't get me wrong, the Gamblers, just like the Renegades, don't want to finish the season with a loss. So don't be surprised if they really go in strong. Then Sunday, Storm more than likely will have a repeat of how things went last week, but it's possible that they sneak something out. That's one of our closest lines of the week, and that's because last week it was a close game, even with the backup in. So I don't think it's time to count DC out, but there are questions. Then when we look at the Kings, about 135. That's a close line as well, but the Kings are a slight favorite. More than likely, Vegas has probably got that one right. Then we look now at kind of some of our other lines. So looking at a Friday night football game, spread's sitting at 6.5 currently. More than likely, that spread is a little big, so I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up. It's either going to be way bigger than that or way closer than that. So tough. Then our over/under sitting at 43.5. Probably going to be an over for tonight. And if we look in now, who we got as our tug favorites? Merriweather sitting at our Merriweather, Howard, and Lingard are all sitting as our favorites. Merriweather, unlikely he gets one. Howard will probably get one because they put together drives in St. Louis. And then Butler at 130 might be worth it to throw a few down on him. Then when we look at our passing, we got Perez at 275, Reed at 250. Perez could easily go over 275. I'll probably take the under, though. And then Reed for 250 could easily go over, but probably take the under there as well. Vaughn's at 100 receiving. Got to take the under there. Butler at 100 receiving. Probably taking the under there, but Butler could definitely get it. Lingard for 80. I'm taking the under because there's been terrible rushing performances out of the Renegades this season. And then Howard for 80. Jarvian's not gotten over 100 yards, I don't think, in one game. So I'm going to take the under on that one as well. Then looking at our Saturday showdown with the Gamblers at the Stallions. Spread sitting at 2.5 right now. Stallions given that 2.5. Probably take the Stallions for that. And then for our over and under number, that's 45.5. It will probably be an under. More than likely, because it's probably going to be a defensive game. But it very well could hit the over, but more than likely it'll be the under. So if we look in who is our TUD favorites for this game, let's see. We've got Snoop sitting at minus 120. Man, they really think Snoop's going to get a TUD. Snoop might. Probably will. And then you got Moreno Cropper at 125. Plus 125. Cropper probably gonna get one. So I'd probably take that. DTR sitting at plus 140. He probably gonna get one too. Snoop probably gonna get one too. So those top three, I think you'd be good taking. Then we got the passing. What do we got? DTR sitting at 275, and then Todd sitting at 3. I'd take the under on both of those. Receiving, Moreno Cropper at 75, Dion Kane at 100. Take the under on Dion, take the over on Moreno Cropper. He's been doing really good this season. Marcus Yarns at 80. Probably take the under there. If it was 60, I'd probably take the over at 60. And then Snoop at 80, take the under there as well. The lines on those are plus 550 and plus 650. Those are terrible, terrible lines. Then looking at the Storm at the Defenders. So Storm is given 1.5. This is a money line game. Who do you think's going to win? Because that's what it's going to come down to. The spread is Who cares about the spread? It's 1.5. Over-unders 47.5. I'd probably take the over. DC does not want to finish the regular season on a loss and a 4-game losing streak going into the playoffs. They want to get some of that confidence back, and I wouldn't be surprised if Orlando is hosting, resting some of their players, especially given the fact they know they're playing in Columbus. They know it's not going to be a home game, so save your strength. Let's see who is our Tud favorite on our Sunday starter. Jackson, of course, sitting at minus 130. Corbin at plus 100 and Valladay at plus 110. All three of them more than likely will score a touchdown. Badger at plus 140 and Roland at plus 145. I don't think either of them are guaranteed, so I'd probably sit with those top three, Jackson, Corbin, and Valladay. More than likely will get a Tud. Then looking at our passing props, we got Plummer at 275. That's a high number for Plummer. Taking the under there, and his Tuds will be 3. I'm taking the under there. Receiving, Powell sitting at 100. Powell could do it. Roland could do it. Neither probably will, so I'd take the under for both of them because they'll probably be getting light reps, especially the fact they've already clinched their playoff spot. Then rush yards, Jackson at 80. Corbin at 80. Corbin probably take the under on. Jackson, though, I might take the over because he's going to need to put up 80-some yards to really finish out the season. And if DC is going to win this game, like I know they want to, it's really, really going to come down to how that rushing attack is going. You know, is Jackson putting up 100 yards? Is he putting up more than 100 yards? Because if he puts up more than 100 yards, they could win the game. And if he does that consistently in the playoffs, the defenders very well may make a push and run the table throughout the playoffs. Then looking at our final game of the season and our Sunday second, the Kings at the Aviators. Columbus is getting 2.5. That spread is probably pretty close. Odds are it'll be a close game. Then our over-under sitting at 46.5. Probably like the over here, more than likely. I would say over's probably what you... So this game's either going to go one of two ways. Both teams are going to put up 30 points or both teams are going to put up 15. But I like the chance that they both put up 40. So I'd probably take the over. Then looking at our Tud score, favorite is James Robinson at minus 105. Then we got Tariq Black at plus 125. Kind of hard to say who will score the Tuds this game, but I do like Winstead at plus 170. That's a decent line for him. The rest of them I'm probably sitting back on. But then when we look at our props for passing, we got Rodgers at 250, Morton at 250. Unlikely either hit that. I'd probably take the under on both. But either could hit that. So keep that in mind if you do make some picks on that front. And then Tuds, they're sitting at plus 380 for 3. I'd probably take them maybe for 1, maybe for 2. But I'd probably back off the passing Tuds. Then receiving yards, Tariq Black for 100 and Tay Martin for 100. I'm probably taking the under on both of those just because not too much to be said there. Then we got Saquandre for 80 when it comes to rushing, and James Robinson when it got 80 as well. I'm taking the under on both of those as well. Overall, I think it remains to be seen what's going to happen with this Friday night, or with this final night game or evening game of the season, this Sunday second that we'll have going on between the Kings and Aviators. There's going to be a lot riding on that game, especially if the Stallions get a win and if DC gets a win earlier in the day. So I expect a lot to ride on, and I expect there to be a lot of celebration this week throughout the broadcast, just given the fact that it is the final week of the season. But the game's kicking off right now, so that'll get started here real shortly. Ultimately, a lot to look forward to. And I will say, we do have some stuff coming up. What I'm going to try and do for the week ahead is I'm going to try and get out there and really, in some form or fashion, be able to bring some content, maybe a little nightcap each week or each day, kind of heading into the playoffs, and maybe even a little bit of a stadium tour ahead. But we may have some UFL talks on tour, so be on the lookout for that. And as it stands right now, the game has not started. So we'll take you into a few minutes, maybe into kickoff. But looking ahead, big thing is going to come down to we'll have 2 playoff games next week and then 1 the week following. So I think, football's not done yet. So I will say, there's a lot to look forward to, especially if you're one of these teams competing. Going into week 10, if you're a Stallions fan or you're a Kings fan, you have the most riding on this week. So don't be surprised if you have a wonderful weekend because your team goes in and clinches their playoff spot and your season's not over yet. Um, but as it stands, we have a good game of football ahead tonight and this game. Um, and right now, we don't have too much going on when it comes to the game. It seems they're doing a lot of the festivity. This is the final Friday night football game of the season, so don't be surprised if we have a lot of fanfare going on. But regardless, I'll say now, I just want to say thank you all that have joined us this season. It has been a long 10 weeks, but we've made it through. We're on to our final game of the season. And then looking ahead, we've got two more, and that'll be our semifinals and then the final, the United Bowl. So I do think lots to be excited about. And if there is anything that you guys would like to see us discuss kind of moving into the playoffs, anything we should reflect on, feel free to let us know. Put a comment, get a message off to us, let us know what you want. We love having you participate in this discussion, so always welcome, and we do love having some of that feedback. So, what do we have other than the playoffs to look forward to? Next big thing after the playoffs is going to be sitting on who's going to get signed, who is going to make that next step, go to the NFL. And I do think week 10 could have an impact on that. There is some recency bias when it comes to our performance. But looking at our game, kickoff has just happened. We're sitting at 8 seconds in. They just kicked the ball. Let's see what's happening here. Kick the ball. It is first. So they got the return off to the 31. The Renegades 31. It's 1st and 10 going into the game here. So right now we're sitting. We'll see what the Renegades dial up for their first play. They may have something in store because if they can get off to a quick start here, they can really set the pace for the entire week. Because if the Renegades get a win, the Battlehawks, look vulnerable. Don't be surprised if the Sharks start to swarm. I would not be surprised at all if we have a really good performance out of the Renegades today. Let's see what we got. If we can get and track some scores here. All we have, they do not have the live play-by-play. Let's check something out here. Let's see what Fox might have to offer. But as it stands, all right, so second down, 2nd and 10. So first thing, they had an incomplete pass. First play of the game, incomplete pass. 2 rushing plays. 3rd down. Not great so far. Renegades are not off to a hot start. Let's see what we can do here. Can we get in and see? Here we go. So, Reed steps back, pass, incomplete to Butler. It's 3rd and 10 on the 31. Let's see what happens here. On the 31. Big game this week, especially for the Renegades, because let's just say Reed's resume might be riding on his performance this week. Very possibly. They're on the 31. What are we going to do for 3rd down? Are they going to punt? Oh, they got a sack. So, not great. Oh, it may have been flagged and called back. Possibly. Quite possibly. Yep. sacked for no loss. Peta Tom Pena, getting a sack, strengthening his case for Defensive Player of the Year as well. Did get it last year, our 2025 Defensive Player of the Year, making his presence felt already in this ball game. So the question will be, what do they do on fourth down? I got a strong feeling they're going to punt. So more than likely, we'll see this ball go out to the 20 with the more than likely out to the 20. And then we'll see what happens. But as it stands right now, this game 0-0, and the Renegades did kind of lose out a little bit there. But we've made it through our first drive, so I think we'll call it there, and we will see you next week for a little bit of additional content, a few more nightcaps as we look ahead into the playoffs and reflect back on the season. So all in all, I will just say thank you for joining us this week. We got a lot of good football ahead, so please enjoy it, and thanks as always for joining. We'd love to have you here, and feel free to let me know if there's anything you want to see us get into this upcoming week or two. But if not, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining us. And please hit that subscribe button, get your notifications on. We are going live pretty consistently, 6:45 on Fridays. As a little pregame to the Friday night football game, but moving into next week and the playoffs, we're going to have some more inconsistent times. We're going to be hitting some nightcaps. So make sure you are subscribed and got your notifications on so you can stay with us. But otherwise, have a wonderful weekend, and thank you again for joining us. It's always a pleasure.